social interaction between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
People of faith have their religious festivals which they celebrate with the people around them in their families and throughout the world. Today on Austin Faith Dialogue, I invite you to take a trip with me to celebrate one of the most wonderfully mysterious and magical festivals that people have, and that is Christ Mass, Christmas. And today we're going to experience Christmas in New Zealand and El Salvador and in Scandinavia. So we hope that you will share this time with us on Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Carl Gronberg, I'm host for your program, and we're delighted to have each and every one of you with us today. I also want to introduce to you the guests for our Austin Faith Dialogue. Dr. Helen Maidment is a physician here in Austin and a native of New Zealand. Heriberto Prudencio is from El Salvador and is also a Lutheran seminary student. And Dr. Ingrid Edlund Berry, a native of Sweden and a professor at the University of Texas. Christmas happens to be one of my favorite festivals, but it's also celebrated in unique and special ways around the world. I have my way that I've celebrated with my family and the way that I grew up knowing Christmas, and I'm sure the same is true for each and every one of you. But today we're going to find out what it's like to celebrate Christmas in a place far away from Austin, Texas, a place called New Zealand. Dr. Maidment, Helen, thank you for being with us on Austin Faith Dialogue, and tell me a little bit about New Zealand. You grew up in New Zealand?
New Zealand it's about a third the size of Texas, Carl, so it's a lot smaller than the United States. It's about 1,200 miles from Australia. It's in the South Pacific, and there's about 3 million people there.
You know what I'd like to do sometime on Austin Faith Dialogue? I'd like to interview and have you and your husband David and your children to tell us about your, what I consider to be a faith pilgrimage coming from New Zealand to Austin and the faith communities with which you have shared your life. But today I want to talk about Christmas. What about Christmas in New Zealand? I would imagine it's different over there.
It's very different, Carl, mainly because it's summertime in December below the equator. So Christmas for me is equated with beaches and tents and picnics and all the summer things. And that's when, as a child, we had our summer holidays.
I have to interrupt just a second now. You're telling me that at Christmas time in New Zealand, you go to the beach and tents and picnics. That's for the mindset of we in North America. That's strange to hear. Are you serious about that?
I'm perfectly serious, Carl. If you want to come on down, I'll show you.
I'd like to join you sometime. Well, how do you, you know, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. You can't have that type of thing. What do you say?
Well, we do dream of white Christmases. We just don't have them. A lot of the traditions in New Zealand are taken from England because a lot of the people that settled New Zealand are from England. So we still have pictures and postcards of Father Christmas, as he's called there, and his sleigh and snow. But I'm afraid outside the sun is shining brightly.
But no snow skiing or anything like that?
No skiing.
And you do have Father Christmas. Is that like Santa Claus?
That's like Santa Claus.
Tell us a little bit about him. Does he come on Christmas Eve, or how does that happen?
Very similar to Santa Claus here. But he has to sit in the stores in New Zealand when it's 95 degrees outside and sweat in his big suit that he has to wear with his big, what we call gum boots, the big black boots.
Do the children in New Zealand line up like they do in the States to have an opportunity to sit on Father Christmas? They do that?
Absolutely.
And do the department stores count down the days left till Christmas and all that type of thing?
It's not quite as commercial as it is here because it's the whole of the New Zealand is not as commercial as the United States as yet. I guess it will become so eventually, but certainly the children get very excited over Christmas, just as they do in any place.
If you were going to be in Christmas in New Zealand this year, which I think you're going to be.
Absolutely. December the 10th, I'm on my way.
December 10th, you'll be there. Well, about the time that we broadcast this program, you'll be in New Zealand and thinking of us here in Austin as we'll be thinking of you in New Zealand. What will you be doing there? Do they bake and prepare for Christmas? When does it start? When do the festivities start in New Zealand?
The festivities start really for the children when they break up from school, which is on December 18th or December 20th, and that's the beginning of their 6-week summer holiday. So that's when all the kitchens get busy and people begin to bake and cook, as they are probably all over the world.
Now, everybody who's watching this program is saying she misspoke. They're saying, she said 6-week summer holiday. Did we hear you right?
Absolutely right.
Do you realize what a change in mindset that is and mentality for us to think of summer holiday at Christmas time? So they began a 6-week holiday, and Christmas is a part of that holiday. When you get close to December 24th and 25th, what happens in New Zealand? Is the church, the faith community, a part of the activities of Christmas?
The church is certainly a big part of the activities in New Zealand, but there'll be a Christmas Eve service and a Christmas Day service just as there is here. But Santa Claus, or Father Christmas as we have there, he doesn't come down the chimney so much. I think he comes in by the door. I never saw him come in. But we have pillowcases that we put at the end of the beds, and that's where he comes to fill up the stockings full of food.
You know what they're wondering, watching this program, they're saying, does he come from the North Pole?
I think he does.
He does make it all the way?
I haven't seen him come either. But we address our letters to the North Pole, so it's a long trip.
It's fantastic. What an interesting idea of sharing Christmas in New Zealand. After you have the Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and going to church, and do you open presents on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day?
Christmas Day, just as it is in most cases in most families here in Austin.
All right. And what about food in New Zealand? Is baking a big thing? Cookies, that type of thing?
Baking and cookies are a very big thing. We call them biscuits there rather than cookies. They eat duck more than turkey or ham, and of course there's all the fresh vegetables in the garden at that time. Fresh peas to be shelled is that's the children's job, is to shell all the peas. And there's all the fresh new potatoes. Here what you call Easter lilies is what they call Christmas lilies here. There's all the Christmas lilies and Christmas flowers.
That which we call in the springtime then the Easter lily, you call that the Christmas lily, and the flowers are a big part of the Christmas celebration.
Yes, there's flowers everywhere in December.
That's an amazing idea. What about traditions? When you were growing up as a little girl in New Zealand, what were some of the traditions that were important to you? What did you look forward to regarding Christmas?
I think one of the biggest things that I looked forward to, it was a real big family time, and believe me, I had a big family. I had like 60 first cousins in a town about the size of Austin. New Zealand is a little place, so most people live fairly close together. There's no distances like California to New York there. So after we had the Christmas in my family home, we would go to have a whole nother Christmas at my grandparents' home, and they would mount a huge marquee on my grandparents' front lawn, and we would have all these tremendous amounts of goodies and huge Christmas tree and a lot more presents once we got there with all these lots and lots of children.
In New Zealand, Christmas was, for you as a child growing up, a time of magic and wonder and awe.
Absolutely, very exciting time.
The same type of qualities that we experience in the United States.
We have an extra day to Christmas that they don't have here called Boxing Day. It's a tradition taken from English times when the masters and mistresses had Christmas on December the 25th, and the servants had their Christmas on the 26th, and they received presents in boxes from the mistresses and masters on their Christmas, which was the 26th. So Boxing Day is also a big national day. It's a big Christmas, sort of post-Christmas picnic day.
Today you don't have as many masters and mistresses and servants and that type of thing. So what do you do then? Do you return presents on Boxing Day? Or?
No, but it's a day that nobody would ever think of working. We all go to the beach and have a big picnic everywhere, all over the country. People are picnicking on that day, rather like they are on July the 4th here, they're picnicking.
I think that sounds like a good idea, that we all go to the beach on December 26th. I think I'll come to New Zealand. That sounds like a wonderful idea. Ediberto Prudencio, El Salvador is your native land, and I would imagine that Christmas, because of the influence of the faith being there, starts pretty early. What is the starting day for the Christmas season and festival in El Salvador?
I would say the entire month is fiesta for people in El Salvador who is waiting for Christmas Eve, which is the evening when people had a lot of activities, dancing, singing, and eating very good food that they prepare.
Before we get to Christmas Eve, though, Ediberto, let's talk a little bit about, you say the entire month of December is really a fiesta then for the people of El Salvador? Is there is there a Santa Claus? Are they looking forward to having presents like we do here? Or when does it start in El Salvador? When does this fiesta begin?
Well, we have the fiesta prior to Christmas Eve, which is the, we call Night of the Lights, which is December the 7th. And we have fireworks. Children enjoy having fireworks.
Mm-hmm.
And also we prepare, we call fogones. I don't know in English the word for that, but it's like wood and fire, and then on the street. And children play around those fire.
Like a bonfire that you would have in the streets? I think, Helen, that's what it sounds like to me, doesn't it, to you? That there'd be a bonfire in the streets, and so fire would be a symbol on December 7th?
Yes, lights. Light.
Okay, good.
Yes. And then, but as I said before, the whole month is a fiesta because we can hear Christmas music reflecting the hope that people have for that season.
And the hope in El Salvador would be for the coming of Christmas Eve, and at that time they would celebrate the birth of the incarnate Word.
Jesus, yes.
Yes. What happens on Christmas Eve?
Well, children write letters for Santa Claus, and we call Santa Claus there, or San Nicolas, and they send the letters hoping that they will get something, maybe not all that they request, but something. And since we don't have fireplace, no chimeneas,
No chimneys, yes.
Santa Claus cannot come through there and put the gift under the tree.
See, there's a connection, Heriberto, that you and Helen have from El Salvador to New Zealand, because in New Zealand, as Helen just said, Santa Claus doesn't come through the chimney. Santa Claus has to come through the front door.
Exactly. The same happened in El Salvador. We don't have snow there, so we don't need a chimney.
So in El Salvador also, you don't have any of this dreaming of a white Christmas type
No,
stuff.
only on movie.
Only in the
Books.
movies.
But children expect having their presents under the pillow.
Oh,
Yes.
how interesting.
At least, I'm talking about my people, my common people. They don't expect big presents.
I see.
So I never expected that. I wrote a letter asking humble thing or maybe big thing, but I knew that it would be under my pillow.
For instance, what kind of present would be slipped under your pillow there in El Salvador as a child when you were growing up?
Well, any kind of toy that probably parents can afford to buy. Or maybe clothes.
Candy? Would it be food?
Maybe no food. No, children never ask for food or candies in that season because they already expect that parents will afford buying some candies, preparing foods, and baking also good pan dulce or sweet bread.
I'd like to come back to that a little bit about what happens to the mother and the father in the family. And maybe we could talk about that in New Zealand also as well as in El Salvador. But, you know, you from New Zealand and you from El Salvador, you've kind of left me yearning and wanting to have a traditional Christmas, I want you to know, okay? So let's go to Northern Europe. Let's go to Scandinavia, okay? And we'll come back to El Salvador and we'll come back to New Zealand. But, you know, I'm wearing my Norwegian sweater today because I want to think about how cold it is over there. And Ingrid, when you are in Sweden for Christmas, it's kind of chilly over there, isn't it, huh?
Well, primarily it's so dark. I think that's my lasting impression and what I think about now. One of my favorite children's books is called Johans jul, or John's Christmas. And the first sentence is, November är lång och grå. November is long and gray.
Oh.
And it's like a day in Austin where you sometimes, you know, it's so overcast here. Well, in Stockholm or any other part of Sweden, it's dark when you wake up, it's dark when you go to school. It might never seem to get bright at all, and then you come home and it's already dark.
So you're saying there are short days then,
Very
the time
short days.
The sun may come up in like 9
It may
o'clock
not.
or may not.
Yeah.
It may be great. In Texas we're used to having blue sky, but it would be tough then to have, and that is in November, and that leads into December.
Leads into December, so I think the greatest impression is that of everyone really needs light, light and warmth and music, but to me, it's candles. That is to create the light and create the warmth, sort of getting prepared for Christmas.
I'd like to talk a little bit about Advent, because neither Helen or Heriberto mention much about the role of Advent leading up to the festival of the Nativity of our Lord. Is Advent important within the Swedish culture and the Swedish Lutheran Church?
It's very important because the last Sunday of the church year used to be called Doom Sunday.
Yes.
And you could expect, I mean, people would flock to some of the churches where the pastors were renowned for giving these fire and brimstone sermons. And you would feel that that was the end of the year, you had absolutely enough. And then by the first of Advent, hope came.
Yes.
And that was very symbolic, and that you had not an Advent wreath the way we do here, but the candles were lined up in a wooden candle holder, one by one, in a straight line. And you would light the first candle, and that was sort of be the first step to Christmas.
Towards the Nativity, the first step.
Towards the Nativity.
Heriberto, you were saying to me before we went on the air that you do have some sense of the Advent season in El Salvador. Is that correct? That there are some kind of recognition of those 4 weeks prior to Christmas?
Yes, we have so many activities around that season, like posadas, which is really when Joseph and Mary were looking for a place to stay, the inn. And that means 9 days of posadas.
That's interesting that that's a part then of the Advent preparation. And then going to Ingrid in Scandinavia, and particularly I guess in Sweden, where you have the beginning of the Christmas, from Advent into the Christmas season, you have Lucia-dagen. And I'd like you to tell the legend of Santa Lucia and what that means to the people of Sweden. And as we do that, we're going to roll some film so that the people watching the program can see Santa Lucia, how it's carried out in one of our local congregations here in Austin. But tell us about Santa Lucia and what that means to the people of Sweden. What's that legend?
Well, it's really an odd tradition, because to a Swede, it means that the eldest daughter of the house, on the morning of the 13th, very, very early, like 5 o'clock, the eldest daughter will dress up in white, and if her parents will allow it, she will wear a wreath or a crown with live candles, and she or someone will help her out, prepare coffee and baked goods, and bring those to the family members in the house.
And once again, you have that kind of imagery of light, again, penetrating that darkness that you experience in Northern Europe, in Scandinavia. You have that whole idea of light. And Santa Lucia was from where?
She was from Sicily, and that's sort of the irony of combining two very different cultures. Because Santa Lucia, like so many other people in the early Christian church, she was a martyr. She suffered for her faith, and there are different stories as to how she came to symbolize light. Well, first of all, the name Lucia has to do with the Latin word lux, meaning light. But there's also the tradition that she wanted to be she didn't want to be tempted by all the evil things of the world, so she blinded herself, or someone else did it to her. So now if you go to a church of Santa Lucia in Italy, you will see the saint, the beautiful young maiden, standing there holding a little plate in her hand with her 2 eyeballs in it. So it's very much a symbol of light in Italy too, but it goes back to the early Christian faith.
And for the people of Sweden, when they go for Lucia-dagen, which is, am I correct in that, it's the beginning then of the Christmas season, so to speak, that from then on, people really focus on the coming of the Nativity of our Lord, and on December 24th and 25th. When do you then experience that whole light? What's it like to worship in a church on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day? I guess Christmas Eve is more my question. In Sweden, are there a lot of candles?
Well, there are services on Christmas Eve. Most of them are family services with a lot of carols and hymns and some reading of the various stories, but the most important service is really the julotta, that is at 6 or 7 on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day morning. And traditionally, it used to be that you would go in your sled traveling many miles through the snow, and you would have torches to light your way to church. And then when you got to church, there would be candles lit in the whole church, and it would be very early. People would be very tired and sleepy, but even so, that would be the very joyful singing of the crowds that came, and then the service that, because it was so early, because it had the true message, was really the climax of Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Are there days of Christmas then that you follow through? Are there the 12 days of Christmas?
Not really. That is, the Christmas Eve is the preparation, where you have certain kinds of food, like the Christmas ham or the famous lutefisk, and it's also the day when Santa Claus comes.
I really think we should tell the people watching this program a little bit about lutefisk. They shouldn't go away without hearing just a little bit about lutefisk. That's an amazing legend in itself, but tell them about this fish.
Well, the lutefisk is a very practical kind of food before the days of refrigeration. The only way to preserve fish was to dry it, and in order to have fish, which goes back to the Catholic idea of fasting on Christmas, the only way to present this food and fish and be able to eat it was then to soak it, but you would soak it not just in water but in lye. And by doing that for a long time in December, you would then get the fish ready, and people who don't like it say that it looks like Jell-O, and it is baked and served with white sauce and white potatoes.
You know, Ingrid, any great person or any great food always has critics, so we can't listen to the critics when they say those kinds of things. I want to ask you one other question about Sweden and Scandinavia. When did you open your presents? Helen says Christmas Day. What was your tradition opening presents?
Absolutely, Christmas Eve. No other time.
See, Helen, that's right.
Santa Claus comes and knocks on the door, and he comes on his skis. He's been traveling, you know, over the snow. He knocks on the door, and he comes in, and he has a big sack over his back. Comes in and says, "Are there any good children?" And children and adults likewise are supposed to look very sort of modest and say, "Well, yes, maybe." And if the children have been good, then he will hand out the presents one by one. And if the children haven't been good, he will just leave.
Ah, that doesn't happen, does it, Ingrid?
Of course not.
Of course, I would hope not. I know the Swedes can be very harsh people, but not that harsh. I would hope not. What about the Christmas tree? And I want to come back to each one of you on that, but just tell us briefly, is the Christmas tree an important part of the festival in Sweden?
It is very important, but it is a fairly recent thing. And there are various schools about how the Christmas tree should be decorated and what it should be used for. The old tradition is that you should have it decorated quite modestly but with candles, preferably live candles, which of course no one would dream of doing now because of the fire hazard. But if you cut your own fresh tree, you decorate with the candles, and then a few pieces of candy, you know, a few things hanging in it. And what you did with the tree was to dance around it. Children and adults would dance around the Christmas tree.
Well, I know that there's going to be some dancing in the Edlund Berry home this Christmas because there's a baby that is going to celebrate his first Christmas in your home this year. And Robert John Edlund Berry is going to have a wonderful Christmas. And is there one thing that you might be doing this Christmas because Robert John Edlund Berry is here this Christmas? Is there something special he'll experience? Will you dance around the tree?
We probably will.
It's going to be a wonderful Christmas for you all, and thanks, Ingrid, for being here. Heriberto, what about trees in El Salvador? Do you have trees there?
We do have trees. Some people put it early in December. Some people put it after December 15, like myself. And the trees that we used, the common people use is branch or trees called alamos.
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 Like Alamo.
Yes, we call alamo. Some people call salamo also. And those who can afford pine tree, they buy it, but they are very expensive. I never had one. And we try to put nice ornaments. Sometimes we buy them, sometimes we try to make them.
So you take the Alamos tree and you put some ornaments, either make them or buy them.
Buy.
Yeah. But the pine tree in El Salvador would be something for the rich
people,
not,
yes.
not for the common average people.
No.
In New Zealand, Dr. Mayben, Helen, what do we do in New Zealand? Do we have a tree?
There's a lot of pine trees in New Zealand, so everybody has a fresh pine tree. We have decorations that are usually made by the children, paper decorations, and not so much store-bought decorations, but more homemade decorations.
Really a time of family gathering together and doing those types of things.
Very much so.
It seems to me that around the world, you know, it's worship and it's family and it's food, and it's a spirit of joy and gratitude for a message of hope and light and peace. Ingrid, would you say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to those watching Austin Faith Dialogue today? How about looking into the camera, the one that has the red light on, and just say, in Swedish, of course.
I would say, God jul, god fortsättning, och gott nytt år.
And would you, Heriberto, say the same in Spanish, looking in the camera?
Con mucho gusto.
And Helen, you take my hand, and we're going to say to all of you, from all of us at Austin Faith Dialogue, Helen, together we say, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Feliz Navidad y un próspero año nuevo.
Thanks for watching Austin Faith Dialogue.